3 months and change to go until the August primaries, and Florida has a new police force focused on election crimes and some tweaks to state election law. The governor signed that bill into law this week, and depending on your perspective, it either tightens election security or potentially disenfranchises minority votes, or both. Florida's election supervisors in 67 counties now putting all those changes into place and figuring out how they work. And in Broward, that would be Joe Scott, and he is here to break all that down with us. Hi, Joe.
Good afternoon, Glenna. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being with us. You are an administrative role. I just want to say that right off the top, not a political role, and yet you maneuver the political will. So if, just so everybody knows who is not in the weeds, 22, there were some more changes, not just changes, but in election year 21 or session year 21, there were some changes. So we have a lot of new election law that you have to administer, a lot of focus on the new police force. So let's start there. Does
Sure.
this new police force, 25 positions eventually, the governor allocated, lawmakers allocated $2.6 million to fund this. Does that have any bearing on your office or how you administer elections at all?
As you know, and a lot of people out there know, I was not for the law that passed, and I don't think that this police force is a good idea. I think it's a massive waste of money. However, now that it's the law of the land and these folks are going to be part of the team in ensuring that we have free and fair elections. So at this point, I'm looking forward to engaging with this, the new folks that are going to be working in the Secretary of State's office and seeking their help to make sure that we have the best election security anywhere.
You know, the bill had more in it than actually became law. One of the things that was stripped out of the bill was something that I think you had said that you were opposed to, and that was more identification required for the vote by mail ballot. That was taken out before the governor signed this into law. But one of the bigger changes is the ballot drop boxes. They now have a name, right? Secure ballot intake stations. How will secure ballot intake stations differ from the drop boxes that everyone, especially during COVID, really came to love?
So what's interesting is that the law really, what they did is they crossed out the word drop box and they replaced it with the word secure ballot intake station. So that's the most substantive thing that happened. So as far as how there's really no change. It's a change of the name of it. My view on this is that it's going to be extremely confusing. Most people just don't follow the day-to-day changes in legislation. So, if we're out there talking about a secure ballot intake station, the average voter isn't going to have a clue what we're talking about.
All right. But I guess the practical question is, tell your voters, are you still going to be able to take your vote by mail ballot and fill it out and put it in that little box? Where are the boxes and will they be secure? And what's the difference?
Right. So as has been the law, and the biggest change happened with SB 90 last year. The law that passed in 2021 basically changed the way we handle drop boxes in the state of Florida. What happened this year was a change of the name. So, based on what happened last year, for Broward County in particular, we're going to have 8 different locations that you'll be able to drop off your ballot most weekdays after the vote by mail ballots go out until Election Day. And then during early voting, there'll be 22 locations, which are all of our early voting sites will also be places that folks can go and drop their ballot off. In terms of, the way we communicate with the public, I don't see much of a change there because I really don't want to confuse people. So there's not a huge change in how we're going to communicate with the public. And there's really no change from these most recent special elections that we had. The drop boxes will still be the same.
Part of this bill has an amendment. There was a law, had an amendment, and it was put in by Senator Annette Taddeo of Miami, Democrat of Miami. And it was put in by her as a direct result of a Local 10 investigation. And we found that there were operatives, third-party voter registration organizations, changing people's parties without their knowledge. And so an amendment to this law stiffens the penalties for that, which is a kind of voter fraud. And so as an elections supervisor who has those roles and what voter is what party. Is your office doing anything, any kind of outreach to let voters know that they need to take responsibility for where they're registered, how they're registered, and what party they're registered for prior to those primaries?
Absolutely. So, that is part of our regular outreach efforts, is to make sure that people are aware that Florida is a closed primary state and that you can only vote in the primary of the party that you're registered with. We do run into these problems every cycle where people will show up to vote in the primary and then discover they're not registered with the party that there'll be a particular candidate that they want to support. And they'll get to the polls and find out, I'm not registered with that candidate's party, I cannot vote. So this is a regular thing that has always happened, and we expect that it will continue to happen. What went on with that third party organization is absolutely despicable because of the fact that we're a closed primary state. And when they change people's parties, you're not going to necessarily change the way people vote. People are going to vote the way they want to vote, but they might be locked out of voting in a primary election that they would like to vote in. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for folks to go out there and do that kind of thing and change people's voter registration. It's not going to get more votes for any particular candidate. So really that's the communication that we try to put out there, is to let people know that they need to check that.
So you had said you were not in favor of this law passing, and there is huge opposition from groups who really feel like minority voters will be disenfranchised, that their votes will be harder to do. They might be blocked from the polls. Can you explain how, practically speaking, this new law might do that?
So one thing for us in the new law that really stuck out for us in Broward County is the requirement to have our branch offices operate 40 hours a week if we want to have a drop box at the branch offices. So it was just really an additional, it's more or less adding more requirements, adding more administrative spend more. We have to spend more money basically in order to have a drop box available. So instead of just coming out and outright banning the drop boxes, it's more or less like we just keep turning the screws and making it more and more expensive, so that eventually counties just opt out and decide not to have them, or end up having far fewer than they would have normally had. So one thing about the state of Florida is that you have to have the ballot back to the supervisor of elections by 7 p.m. on election night. And that's really what drives people to want to use a drop box instead of sending it through the mail. So it's really important for us to have as many drop boxes as possible. And the law makes it so that it's more expensive for us to have a drop box anywhere.
But isn't the onus, though, on the voter, whether or not, I mean, there was a time when there were no drop boxes at all. It wasn't even a thing. So isn't the onus on the voter to just make sure your voter registration is correct, make sure you know where to vote and when, make sure your IDs are correct, and go vote? It sounds like it should not be that complicated of a process.
Right. And I see my role as the supervisor of elections to try to make the process as easy and inviting as possible for as many voters as possible, understanding that the average citizen, the average voter out there is focused on their job, they're focused on their families, they're working hard. And when it comes time to vote in an election, they don't know the ins and outs of election law. So we need to make things simple. We need to make it convenient. So some of the rules that we have here in Florida make it extremely difficult for voters, saying that, if they were to discover that their party registration is wrong 2 weeks before an election, it's too late to change it. In the case of a primary, we would want to vote in a primary. So there's just these things that are in the law. And as far as drop boxes, it's about making the system easier and more accessible to the average citizen.
And that is where we come in, our role comes in as well as you. Joe Scott, Supervisor election in Broward County, great to have you on the program.